Hello everyone, welcome to our channel Biology for All. In this video, I'm going to talk about the forebrain. First, let us see the divisions of the neural system. Central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system are the two main ones, and in the central nervous system we have the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain is divided into three main parts, that is the forebrain, midbrain and the hindbrain. Forebrain or the prosencephalon has three parts: the olfactory lobes, the cerebrum and the diencephalon. Parts of the forebrain or the prosencephalon. The prosencephalon has three parts. First one here that we are going to talk about is the olfactory lobes. The olfactory lobes are located at the inferior part of the brain, which is just above our nasal chambers. So here we can see the location of the olfactory lobes, that is the inferior side of the brain. Now there are a pair of olfactory lobes in which you can see a swollen part that is called as the olfactory bulb and a tubular structure that is the olfactory tract. Together they form the olfactory lobes. These olfactory lobes are concerned with the sense of smell. They are directly connected with the nasal chambers. The second part of the forebrain or prosencephalon is the cerebrum. The cerebrum, now as viewed from the top, this is the top view that we are seeing here. So as we view from the top, we are able to see a long fissure. This fissure is called as the median longitudinal fissure. So this median longitudinal fissure separates the cerebrum to form two different parts or hemispheres, which are called as the left cerebral hemisphere on our left side and the right cerebral hemisphere on our right side. The right side controls the left part of our body, whereas the left controls the right part of our body. Now let us try and separate out the cerebrum from the longitudinal fissure. So if we try and separate them out from the longitudinal fissure, internally we are able to see a band of nerve fibers. So this is a thick band of nerve fibers which are coming from the cerebral cortex region. So in the cerebral cortex, you have all the cytons of the neurons, and the axons or the nerve fibers then move internally into the central region of the cerebrum. So these bundles are about 200 million, and these tracts appear white in structure. So this is called as the corpus callosum. They help in connecting the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. So this is called as the corpus callosum. So here we see a picture of the brain, and this white part which you can see is the corpus callosum. The part above that is the cerebral cortex, and this cerebral cortex is made up of layer of cells, that is a layer of nerve cells or neurons. Now since it is mostly made up of the cell bodies, these look gray in color and are called as gray matter. Here it looks pink, but it is gray in color. Now the cerebral cortex has the association areas that includes the motor and the sensory areas, but there is no bifurcation of the motor or sensory areas here. So these are called as the association areas, and the corpus callosum is the fibers of the tracts that are covered with myelin sheath. Now because they are covered with myelin sheath, they appear opaque white, and that is why that is called as the white matter. Let's now see the parts of the cerebrum. Cerebrum is demarcated into four different regions. So these are also called as the cerebral lobes. These demarcations are formed by different fissures, which are the central sulcus, the parieto-occipital sulcus, and a sylvian fissure, or that is also called as the longitudinal fissure. The front part or the anterior part of the cerebrum is the frontal lobe. So this is the frontal lobe. This frontal lobe is separated from the next lobe, that is the parietal lobe, by a central sulcus. The posterior part of the cerebrum has the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is separated from the parietal by the parieto-occipital sulcus. The sides of the cerebrum is the temporal lobe, which is separated from the parietal and the frontal by the sylvian or the longitudinal fissure. Now, let us see the functions of these four lobes. The frontal lobe is concerned with the voluntary motor activities of the body. It is also responsible for thinking, planning, problem solving, and decision making. So, this is the lobe that controls all these or is responsible for all these functions. The parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is responsible for registering the feeling of touch, hotness, coldness, and pain. These are registered here. It is also responsible for the visuospatial processing. Then the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is concerned with sensation of light. For receiving the sensation of light, it decodes the visual information that we receive and is also responsible for color identification. The temporal lobe. Temporal lobe is concerned with interpretation of sound that we hear, and it helps in understanding of the language. This lobe also is concerned with memory, speech, and emotions. The third part of the forebrain is the diencephalon. The diencephalon consists of three parts, that is the epithalamus, hypothalamus, and the thalamus. So here on the dorsal side, we have the habenula, the pineal gland, and the posterior commissure, which forms the epithalamus. The epithalamus, that is the posterior commissure, consists of a band of white fibers which is responsible for bilateral pupillary reflex. The thalamus is a round structure on which the cerebrum wraps around. This is a coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. Below the thalamus and above the pituitary is located the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls the body temperature. It is also called as the thermostat. It also controls the urge of eating and drinking. It controls the sexual drive, rage, anger, etc. Apart from that, the hypothalamus also controls the pituitary, and it contains neurosecretory cells, and these neurosecretory cells produces the hormones or the neurosecretions that regulate the functioning of the anterior pituitary and also secretes certain hormones like ADH and oxytocin. Inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere, that is near the corpus callosum, and a group of associated structures, that is the amygdala and the hippocampus, forms the limbic system. This limbic system is involved in regulation of sexual behavior and expression of emotional reactions. So, if we look at the individual functions, the amygdala is responsible for controlling the moods, that is, in terms of anger and rage, and the hippocampus is responsible for regulation of human behavior. So, this is in terms of emotional reactions, and it also helps in converting short term memory to long term memories.